It is the greatest aviation mystery of all time. Malaysian Airlines flight MH370.
370 maintaining level 350.
Somewhere in the far depths of the Indian Ocean lies a massive passenger jet and the remains of its 239 passengers and crew.
This is aviation's greatest mystery. The last time the world had this interest in a missing airplane, the captain was Amelia Earhart.
Tonight, the world's top air crash investigators and experts re-examine its last hours, its final moments. Why, how, and where?
It's an officer's place to search.
MH370, the Situation Room. Good evening and welcome to a special edition of 60 Minutes. I'm Tara Brown. Right now, 3,000 kilometres from Perth, in the middle of the southern Indian Ocean, there's a state-of-the-art ship searching for MH370. What it's doing may be the final act in the mystery, the tragedy, of the missing Boeing 777 aircraft and its 239 passengers and crew. The investigation into the fate of MH370 has been without precedent. So why, after more than 4 years, has it not been found? To answer that question, we've brought together some of the world's leading aviation, crash investigation and oceanography experts for a final reckoning. Was MH370 a catastrophic accident or mass murder? They are the most terrifying accidents of all. Terrible errors by man, disastrous mechanical malfunctions, deliberate carnage by hijackers, or the rarest of all, mass murder by their pilot. But they always have a cause, and we always find out why. It's the job of men like these. Martin Dolan, former head of the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. He led the search for MH370. Veteran air crash investigator Larry Vance from Canada. And American John Cox, global air safety specialist. World-renowned oceanographer Professor Charitha Pattiaratchi. And Simon Hardy, senior Boeing 777 pilot and instructor.
So we're coming up to the second engine failure point, which is now.
Tonight, our experts reveal new evidence, how they believe MH370 was brought down. We test fly its final minutes.
It's still accelerating, so it's probably supersonic now. Okay, we're going to crash now, though. That's it.
From the aircraft's actual flight plan, its mysterious route is re-examined, with chilling discoveries.
What technical reason is there for this? And after 3 months of thinking about it, I finally got the answer.
And the latest forensic evidence put to the test. So we see bits of wreckage and you see clues.
There's all kinds of evidence in here. Tara, if this was a high-speed dive, this piece would not exist. The logic that was used is based on evidence that's not correct.
So which parts of the evidence are not correct?
The fact that the airplane ran out of fuel. It didn't run out of fuel. The fact that...
so your evidence for that is?
The fact that the flaps were down and it conducted a controlled descent.
The fact that the speculation the flaps may have been down.
Well, now it's speculation to you. To me, there's evidence to support it.
So we know that there's electricity back in the airplane after an interruption.
And the cause for that interruption is?
That's my question.
Some people are arguing.
What are you arguing, Simon?
It's simple. It's obvious. My calculation said it's in there.
To these men, MH370 is not lost, it's unfinished business.
If you take history and you look back, it says we'll find it. Mm-hmm. We always have.
Yes.
So if history is our guide, I remain optimistic.
The flight that shocked the world left Kuala Lumpur on March 8th, 2014. On board were 12 crew members and 227 passengers, including 8 from Australia. At 42 minutes past midnight local time, MH370 sets off for Beijing. In the cockpit is 53-year-old Malaysian captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a highly respected veteran of the skies. By his side, his inexperienced co-pilot, 27-year-old Farik Abdul Hamid, on his first ever flight as a 777 co-pilot. For 37 minutes, MH370 is just another commercial aircraft in the sky.
370 maintaining level 350.
Approaching the point at which Malaysian Air Traffic Control will hand over to Vietnam. Then, Captain Zahari makes a last routine, but now infamous radio transmission.
Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
2 minutes later, its transponder and other ground communications are turned off, right on the border of Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace. The Boeing 777 literally vanishes from the face of the Earth. Inside Australia's Air Investigation Headquarters, ATSB Chief Martin Dolan got the call. When the plane is missing, when all the communication has gone, are you thinking at that point catastrophic accident, or are you thinking pilot gone bad?
At that point, what we are thinking is there is an aircraft missing. There is at least a possibility that some people have survived, and certainly in my experience, the first thought is not what happened, it's are there people still alive and can we do something about that?
So in the first hours, they're mobilizing the search effort, the hopefully rescue efforts. Where's the debris? Those questions were central to everyone. If there were survivors, you've got to find them. So it's those first hours that turn into days that where's the airplane? And then the evidence starts rolling in. Now something's wrong. Now something doesn't fit what I'll call standard profile for accident investigation. Something with this one is different.
In this day and age, as sad as it is, do you assume terrorism immediately?
Yes. If this had been a terrorist event as we would normally classify them, then it's almost invariable that a terrorist organisation will claim credit for the event. And there was no such claim made in this case.
For the families of those aboard MH370, March 8th, 2014 was the beginning of a nightmare that has no end. 4 years of questions, 4 years of fading hope there will ever be answers. And everyone who lost someone has lived lonelier lives, missing the moments that might have been. And that's certainly how Amanda Lawton feels.
The beach never felt the same for that first year. To think they could be out there somewhere. There's constantly reminded, you look up in the sky and there's an airplane up in the sky and you just instantly question, how does something like that disappear, you know?
Amanda's parents, Bob and Kathy Lawton, were on a trip of a lifetime, a long-planned holiday to China with friends Rodney and Mary Burrows.
It's just knowing what happened, you know. People don't go on a holiday and not come back because they've disappeared. It's not fair.
Why do you think it's so important to find out what happened?
The world needs to know what happened to MH370. How does a Boeing 777 disappear? And could this happen again? We need to find our loved ones. Like, we're in so much pain. My sister's family. It doesn't get any easier. Like.
Coming up, dreadful mistakes.
If this had happened in the US, there would have been a military fighter jet with this aircraft within 20 minutes.
And
Somebody was looking out the window
the pilot's bizarre personal farewell.
to his hometown.
And the moment of mass murder. What do we think has happened to the passengers at this point? That's next on 60 Minutes. To the frustration of families whose loved ones perished, so many possible answers about the fate of MH370 were lost in the immediate aftermath of the plane's disappearance. One of the greatest, a stunning oversight by Malaysian authorities that meant the massive initial search was focused in the wrong place. Incredibly, it took the Malaysians 4 days to admit they were searching in the completely wrong direction. For those 4 wasted days, search aircraft and ships scoured the ocean between Malaysia and Vietnam without finding a trace of MH370. On the 4th day, Malaysia's then Prime Minister, Najib Razak, called his first press conference and dropped a bombshell.
The Royal Malaysian Air Force primary radar data showed that an aircraft which was believed but not confirmed to be MH370 did indeed turn back.
Immediately after dropping off civilian radar, the Malaysian military tracked the plane as it dramatically changed course, veering back across the Malaysian mainland.
These movements are consistent with deliberate action by someone on the plane.
To the experts in the Situation Room, Malaysia's failure to detect the rogue jet immediately was an extraordinary security lapse. How can a plane fly around like this and not alert authorities? I mean, if it's being spotted on the military radar...
If this had happened in the US or in the UK, there would have been a military fighter jet with this aircraft within 20 minutes.
It does sound like a terrorist's dream. You can fly through here, an area that does have military radar, and not be picked up.
Did the military perceive a threat? And if the answer to that is no, then they're in a low alert environment. But I think part of the lessons learned is that even though the airplane may not present a threat, if it's out of position, we need to know why.
Could a catastrophic malfunction, fire or any other accident have caused the aircraft's 180-degree change of course? Our experts say no. Are we all in agreement that there could be no accident scenario that would explain what looks like the controlled flight of the plane at the beginning?
You can develop scenarios that potentially explain the facts that we know them in that stage of the flight where the aircraft is tracked. But if you add them up, they are so remote in likelihood that you can say effectively you can eliminate it.
It's the probability issue. When you put these together, the probabilities become literally 1 in a trillion. I don't think that there's a reasonable accident scenario that would
exactly
explain
right. Too many
There's too many coincidences.
Our 777 pilot, Simon Hardy, has reconstructed Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah's actual flight plan from the military radar and made a remarkable discovery. MH370's pilot avoided detection by either Malaysian or Thai military radar by flying along the border, crossing in and out of each country's airspace.
As the aircraft went across Thailand and Malaysia, it runs down the border, which is wiggling underneath, means it's going in and out of those 2 countries, which is where their jurisdictions are. So both of the controllers aren't bothered about this mysterious aircraft because it's gone. It's not in our space anymore. So there's a reason.
So
for
that
each
was
of these.
deliberate?
Yes, there's a reason. If you were commissioning me to do this operation and try and make a 777 disappear, I would do exactly the same thing. As far as I'm concerned, it's very accurate flying, and I think it did the job because we know, as a fact, that the military did not come and intercept the aircraft.
But Simon found something even more disturbing in Captain Zahari's flight plan. Detail of MH370's unexplained, strange turn at Penang. In the first of the flight simulations he'll run for us tonight, he reveals Captain Zahari dipped his wing to see Penang, his hometown.
If you look very carefully, you can see it's actually a turn to the left, then start a long turn to the right, and then do another left turn. So I spent a long time thinking about what this could be, what technical reason is there for this. And after 2 months, 3 months of thinking about it, I finally got the answer. Somebody was looking out the window.
In your opinion, why did he want to have a look at Penang?
It might be a long emotional goodbye or a short emotional goodbye to his hometown.
After leaving Penang, MH370 runs the military radar gauntlet undetected for nearly 400 kilometres to the northwest before dropping out of range. To the Situation Room, it's another clearly deliberate move by whoever is in control of the aircraft. By now, the crew and passengers would have surely known something was terribly wrong. What do we think has happened to the passengers at this point?
The thing that gets discussed the most is that at the point where the pilot turned the transponder off, that he depressurized the airplane, and which would disable the passengers. There is no reason not to believe that that's what the pilot did, because that would be consistent with everything else that the pilot did. And I would be comforted in thinking that that's probably what happened.
But if the plane had not been depressurised, do you think that there would have been attempts to contact people from the plane? Would there have been phone calls?
A lot more opportunity to do that, that's for sure. I think that if you go down into your deep thoughts, you think that's probably the most likely thing that the pilot would do, given his intention to make the airplane disappear and not wanting any interference from the back or anybody using cell phones or anybody trying to call people. That's in my opinion, that's probably what happened. You asked the question, I'll give you that answer.
So it's the nature of the silence around this aeroplane that makes the mystery so great.
Every day that went by, the mystery grew deeper, and this became very quickly unlike any accident in aviation's history. The last time that the world had this interest in a missing airplane, the captain was Amelia Earhart.
Coming up, more damning evidence against the rogue captain
He did it deliberately.
and the mysterious 6-hour flight to nowhere.
The airplane was flown to this part of the ocean for one single reason, not to be found forever.
That's next on 60 Minutes. We now know that flight MH370 made a gigantic U-turn just after it disappeared from air traffic control screens. It was then tracked by military radar, flying back over Malaysia and out into the Indian Ocean, a route that seems inexplicable unless you contemplate the unthinkable, that Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah had planned his own death and those of his passengers and crew, as a terrible few pilots had done before him. Tuesday, March 24th, 2015. 40 minutes after takeoff from Barcelona en route to Dusseldorf, Germanwings Flight 9525 disappears from radar over the French Alps. The Airbus A320 was carrying 150 passengers and crew, including Melbourne mother and son, Carol and Greg Friday. All were killed instantly when the plane crashed at high speed into a mountainside. The cockpit voice recorder would later reveal the awful truth. It wasn't an accident, but mass murder. When the plane's captain left the cockpit to go to the bathroom, his co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, locked him out. The stricken captain could be heard trying to break his way back in as Lubitz sent the plane into a kamikaze dive. And Germanwings wasn't the first case of pilot suicide.
Somewhere on that tape, the co-pilot makes a statement in Arabic of a religious nature that has some reference into going into death.
In 1999, Egypt Air Flight 990 plunged into the Atlantic Ocean east of New York, killing all 217 on board. US investigators found that co-pilot Gamil al-Batouti deliberately crashed the plane, apparently in revenge at being accused of sexual misconduct by his employer. And there have been other pilot suicide mass murders over the years, with hundreds of innocent lives lost. Did those crimes set the stage for MH370 and Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah? The spectre of pilot suicide is raised because it comes into question what happens after the plane is lost to the military radar.
He was killing himself. Unfortunately, he was killing everybody else on board, and he did it deliberately.
Pilot suicide, we have seen some very few, very unfortunate cases of it, because you're constantly evaluated, you're constantly put under stress, you're constantly tested. It just comes with the job. You know, to have somebody just snap and elect to take their own life is a tragedy. But to do it and commit mass murder at the same time, it's very hard for me to even begin to understand it.
And Simon, it looked really hard for you to even watch it.
Yeah, any aircraft coming to grief and people coming to grief inside it is something that we're focused on avoiding. We don't even let people crash the simulator. In the course of your training, you won't let the guy crash the simulator. It's called negative training. And you don't want it to go into his mind, even in the pretend situation of a simulator.
If Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah had been intent on killing himself and all on board MH370, then this next discovery was confounding. Instead of crashing into the sea immediately, the plane had kept flying for another 6 hours. But with all its communication systems dead, where it had gone was anyone's guess. 10 days after MH370 vanished, engineers at Britain's Inmarsat shocked the world. One of its satellites had picked up a series of faint data signals from the aircraft's engines, proving they'd kept running for 6 hours. The signals were meant for the engine's manufacturer to monitor them in flight, never designed to provide location data for the aircraft. But Inmarsat engineers knew the precise position of their satellite above the Indian Ocean. A series of extraordinary calculations revealed the distance of the plane from that satellite at each of the signals. Plotting those distances gave them 7 arcs through which the plane must have passed. The 7th and last arc put the plane's final location somewhere in a vast air corridor that ran north as far as Kazakhstan and south deep into the Indian Ocean.
This new satellite information has significant impact on the nature and scope of the search operation.
Tell me what that corridor looks like. How big is that corridor? What direction are we talking about?
Well, all we were measuring was the distance from a satellite that sits over the middle of the Indian Ocean. So those arcs are very reliable pieces of information. The problem is that there's a whole set of distances from the satellite that could reach from the southern Indian Ocean all the way to Central Asia. All we knew was there was this arc, and somewhere along it was where the aircraft's flight ended.
At Inmarsat headquarters in London, analysts pulled off a final calculation using the satellite data. As Inmarsat's chief revealed, there was no doubt MH370 flew south.
We can give you a likely area of the Southern Ocean, but we can't tell you exactly where to look.
But as the world's eyes turned south to one of the wildest and most remote stretches of ocean on Earth, there is a single collective question. Why would anyone want to fly the plane deliberately to this part of the ocean?
To make it disappear. The airplane was flown to this part of the ocean for one single reason, and it was because the pilot wanted it to disappear forever, never to be seen again, not to be found forever.
10 days after MH370 went missing, the real search could finally begin. An international alliance of ships and planes scoured several million square kilometres of the southern Indian Ocean. But where there should have been a massive debris field created by its impact with the water, not a trace of the aircraft or its passengers was found. What would we expect to see if there was a high impact crash?
I can speak to that because I worked on Swiss Air 111 accident that was a high impact crash. We had 2 million pieces that were created by hydrodynamic forces as the airplane entered the water at high speed. If this airplane entered the water at high speed, you would expect to see an equivalent amount of damage.
Shari, as an oceanographer, tell us about this part of the ocean, this part of the world.
It is a very hostile area, so lots of waves and wind, so it is rough. It took 10 days before the search actually came to this part. In the 10 days, there were 2 cyclones, so there was a lot of mixing and a lot of very big seas, which would have also broken up part of the stuff that we're talking about.
So our job at this stage was, we're going to have a search. Where do we search? We search in the area that the aircraft is most likely to be. It's not the place where the aircraft is guaranteed to be, but by our best assessment on all the information that was available to us at the time, where is the aircraft most likely to be, that's where we concentrate our resources.
Coming up, have we finally located the right area to search?
It's in there. It's obvious. It's an obvious thing to do. It's an obvious place to search.
And MH370's final seconds.
If I'm going to make the aircraft disappear, I will continue to be there. I will make sure I'm there to the end.
That's next on 60 Minutes. The one vital clue investigators had about the fate of MH370 was satellite data showing it had been flown to the furthest stretches of the southern Indian Ocean. But the deepening mystery would not be cracked until the plane itself was found. So now Australia took charge of the investigation, running what would be the biggest undersea search in history. Using every possible known parameter, satellite data, fuel load and probable cruise speed, the ATSB mapped out a search area for MH370 covering 120,000 square kilometres of the ocean floor. The effort was coordinated by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau under its Commissioner, Martin Dolan. So today, what do you think happened at the end of the flight?
I still think the weight of the evidence, which is why the search has been concentrated where it is that for whatever reason, it's unlikely there were control inputs at the end of the flight, and therefore the aircraft spiralled into the water and crashed.
The ATSB's insistence that MH370 fell from the sky in a steep, seemingly uncontrolled dive was based on their highly technical recalculation of the satellite data, which showed a probable, extremely fast descent. The search area defined by this death dive scenario was 25 nautical miles either side of the 7th arc. If that was the most probable scenario, if that's what happened to the plane, why haven't you found it?
That's a question that's becoming more pointed as we eliminate more of the search area.
Do you accept that the other possibility is that the plane was controlled right to the end?
We've always accepted that there was a possibility that was the case.
What does that do to the potential search area then?
It's an almost impossible task, and with the resources governments are likely to make available, it would be impossible.
Relying on the satellite calculation that MH370 made a steep, high-speed descent, there are 2 primary scenarios. The first is the so-called death dive that has dictated the ATSB's 4-year, $200 million search for MH370. The second is that Captain Zahari maximised his fuel range at altitude, then used the speed of his dive to glide the aircraft to a controlled landing on the ocean. But could any pilot do that? Captain Simon Hardy will try. First, though, he will fly the ATSB's assumed death dive.
I'm going to turn off the right engine now. So the aircraft's going to start slowing down and the left engine comes up to compensate for the fact that we've lost one of them.
Simon is doing what is almost never done in a simulator, deliberately allowing his aircraft to crash. And the assumption at this point is that nobody's in control of the plane.
Yeah.
This is just autopilot.
So we're not going to touch it, we'll just watch and see what happens. So 5 miles to go, just 35 seconds.
After flying for 7.5 hours, the plane is at the very limit of its range as it runs out of fuel. We're entering the death dive.
This is the point. Turn that engine off. You've lost all your instruments, which is correct.
Within a matter of seconds, it begins a catastrophic dive from which there will be no recovery.
The speed's washing off now even more because we've lost that engine, and now it's starting to turn.
Even in a simulator, it is a sobering
Speed's
experience.
now coming up. Warning is saying bank angle. This is overspeed warning, knots. Pull up, terrain. It's now saying you're going to hit the ground at this rate of descent. We've got 10,000 feet to go. It's still accelerating, so it's probably supersonic now in this particular. Okay, we're going to crash now. There, that's it. Okay, stop. That's pretty horrible, isn't it?
From cruising altitude to ocean surface, it's all over in less than 2 minutes, putting the plane not far from where it finally ran out of fuel. How far did we travel?
We travelled 11.9 miles from the time the second engine failed.
Do you think what we've just shown actually happened?
I don't think it happened, no, because I think that somebody was controlling the aircraft to the end. The death dive thing isn't realistic as far as I'm concerned.
So that then leaves another scenario.
Well, it leaves the scenario that this was a mission by one of the crew to hide the aircraft as far away from civilization as possible.
Now we run the counter scenario. Taking into account the ATSB's calculation of a high-speed descent, could MH370's pilot have pulled out of the so-called death dive? And how much further could he have flown before landing on the water?
So we're coming up to the second engine failure point. It's now
Within moments of the second engine running out of fuel, we're once again spiralling into what looks like a catastrophic dive.
bank, 5,000 feet a minute, 6,000, 8,000, 9,000, there's full-scale deflection, so now I'm going to recover the aircraft.
Only this time, in the skilled hands of a pilot, the plane is brought back under control.
The speed's coming back.
With no power and the most rudimentary of controls, the Boeing 777 is actually flying again.
So now we're just flying with no engines, we're just a huge glider.
You seem to pull the plane out of that death dive effortlessly. Is that because we're in a simulator, or can you do that as a pilot?
No, you can do it. I think if you put any pilot here, he would be able to do the same thing.
Our journey to the ocean surface will take a full 9 minutes and add nearly 100 nautical miles to our flight.
500 feet, 300 feet, 100 now. And that's crashed. That's it.
A controlled crash that raises fundamental questions about the central assumption that guided the search for MH370.
The total travelled is 88.4, which puts us way outside the search area that is currently being done. So if you ask me, has there ever been a chance of finding the aircraft, the answer is no.
Whether MH370 was under the control of its captain Zahari Ahmad Shah until the very end is the question dividing the Situation Room, with Martin Dolan adamant the ATSB's 25 nautical mile search corridor is still the most likely.
The width along the arc of the likely location of the aircraft, no one is arguing with. What we continue to have...
I'm arguing.
Okay, you feel free to argue, Simon. Some people are arguing. We remain confident in the quality of the mathematical analysis of those signals.
What are you arguing, Simon?
Well, I'm arguing if the ATSB have said that the end-of-flight scenario could be that there's somebody there, then it's going to go way beyond 25 nautical miles if someone's flying it. You can see there's a dark area there, which is the Goldfinch fracture zone, which runs up through the whole area. My calculation said it's in there. And so all I wanted was to go another 40, 50 miles. It's simple, it's obvious. It's an obvious thing to do. It's an obvious place to search.
So, Martin, why not look there? Why not search that area if it's so simple, so obvious?
So we didn't dismiss that out of mind, and we were weighing up a range of different evidence.
For Martin Dolan and the ATSB's long-held focus on an unpiloted, uncontrolled dive, this is the moment of truth. If you accepted that there was a pilot controlling the plane at the end, wouldn't the most likely search area be different?
Yes.
So I accept you have to prioritise. So did you get your priorities wrong?
If we don't end up finding the aircraft in the search area, then the conclusion is that we focused on the wrong set of priorities, yes.
Martin's admission has huge implications for the search and the motivation for Captain Zahari's mysterious flight south. So I guess the question is, if Captain Zahari was intent on committing suicide, why would he fly the plane for another 6 hours?
To make it disappear. Simple as that. He was taking it to a predestination, someplace that he had planned to take it, and he flew that 6 hours to get it there. The airplane on the bottom of the ocean right now, as I see it, the fuselage is in one piece, the left wing is still on it, the right wing may be off, the engines are separate, but you basically have 4 pieces of airplane down there. It's not scattered all over the bottom of the ocean.
Larry Vance believes MH370 is still largely intact because he's sure Captain Zahari ditched it deliberately. In more heroic circumstances, other pilots have proved that a water landing is possible. The images of the miracle on the Hudson, US Airways Flight 1459's crash landing on New York's Hudson River in 2009 are unforgettable. Another infamous water landing, Ethiopia Airlines Flight 961, hijacked and out of fuel, captured on amateur video. Miraculously, 50 of the 175 people aboard survived. Even in the worst conditions, controlled water landings can leave the plane largely intact with little wreckage. And the wreckage so far recovered from MH370 may be further evidence it was piloted to the end and was not a high-speed impact. Larry, for you, what is the significance of the first bit of debris that washed up off Africa?
Tara, if this was a high-speed dive, this piece would not exist.
Larry Vance believes this recovered flaperon from MH370's right wing, reconstructed for the official ATSB investigation, would have been massively damaged if there'd been a high-speed crash.
What would happen instead is that this piece would hit at a great high speed, and the front of it would be crushed in. It's hollow, the water would invade inside, and it would just explode from the inside out. So this piece would not even exist.
And to Larry, there are other damning clues. The erosion of the flaperon's trailing edge.
Would happen because the flap was extended down, and the force of the water would be enormous, and this is what made this all erode here at the back.
The flaps could not be extended down unless a pilot was in control of the aircraft. And the reason for doing that would be to land the plane, thereby keeping it intact, leaving as little debris as possible. Martin, does the ATSB accept that the flaps were down?
That was not the assumption when we were defining our search area.
Do you have proof that they weren't extended?
No, and this is the point that we've been trying to make, that there are 2 viable theories, that someone was at the controls of that aircraft and applying control inputs at the end of flight, or they were not. And there's evidence that supports both of those theories.
I think that most people will agree that the flaps were down. Not only were they down, they were fully extended.
All we're saying at the moment, Larry, is that the evidence is not yet sufficient to draw as firm a conclusion as you appear to have done.
My contention is that that's the starting point up here is not supported by the evidence.
So which parts of the evidence are not correct?
The fact that the airplane ran out of fuel. It didn't run out of fuel. The fact that...
so your evidence for that is?
The fact that the flaps were down and it conducted a controlled ditching.
You can't get the speculation the flaps may have been down.
Well, now it's speculation to you. To me, there's evidence to support it.
And this ditching would not be something that would be easily done. What would be the average wave height on that day? Do you know?
3 to 4 meters.
3 to 4 meters. That's quite sizable waves that is going to create a lot of damage on the airplane.
I think you could do a successful ditching in a big aircraft in that sea. As Larry is saying, I think you could end up with most of the aircraft intact. I agree with you. The fact is that this is planned meticulously to make the aircraft disappear, and therefore, if I'm going to make the aircraft disappear, I will be there at the end, unless something bad has happened to me, like
to do a controlled ditching. Is why
I will continue to be there. I will make sure I'm there to the end.
If you assume that it went into the ocean under control at landing speed, then the idea of it fracturing into tens of thousands of pieces goes down dramatically. I think it's probably also possible that the airplane is in multiple large pieces.
So you think that Larry's interpretation has merit?
Absolutely, it has merit.
Adding weight to the rogue pilot scenario that Captain Zahari planned to stay at the controls until the end was an eerie flight simulation found on his home computer, charting a course that ended in the southern Indian Ocean. Simon Hardy reveals a stunning truth in Zahari's flight simulation. He didn't plot an endpoint, leaving himself nowhere to land but the surface of the ocean.
It's either a series of massive coincidences, which are getting more and more, and on top of each other is looking less and less like a coincidence, or it's an intentional act of someone who is doing something very clever.
Coming up, are we on the verge of finding the lost wreckage?
When you look at it and you go back into the history of commercial jet aviation, with fare-paying passengers on board, we've always found the airplane.
That's next on 60 Minutes. The search for MH370 has not ended. As we speak, the hunt goes on in the depths of the southern Indian Ocean, where a ship called the Seabed Constructor, owned by private company Ocean Infinity, has been operating since January. It's searching an area north of the previous search zone. But that search will end, probably next month, and with it, perhaps the last chance of ever finding the missing plane and its passengers, of ever answering the question, what happened to MH370? For those who say to keep searching for MH370 is futile, history has a lesson. Air France 447, which plummeted into the Atlantic in 2009. While some surface wreckage was recovered, a year-long underwater search failed to find a single trace of the plane on the ocean floor and was abandoned. A year later, in 2011, the team that located the Titanic began a new search with new technology for Air France 447. They found the missing aircraft in a week. Now, similar technology is being used in the hunt for MH370, a swarm of highly advanced autonomous underwater vehicles deployed around the clock from their mothership, the Seabed Constructor. They've been searching up to 1,100 square kilometres a day since January. But critically, they're looking to the north of the original search area, an area partially defined by the drift analysis work of Professor Padiaracci. Do you think Ocean Infinity might have success?
Well, I was hoping that they would. You talk about hope. It took 100 years almost to find Titanic. And we're now finding World War I and World War II submarines and shipwrecks. And so there's always hope. when our systems get better and we have better technology.
There are the families of 239 people out there that at the moment still do not have an answer to what happened to their loved ones. And some level of closure comes with finding the aircraft. So that's the reason for continuing. But on the other side of this, you've got government saying the cost of this at some point outweighs any benefits we will get from it. And that's what we elect governments to do. I may not agree with them in this case because I'm still passionately committed to finding the aircraft.
When you look at it and you go back into the history of commercial jet aviation, with fare-paying passengers on board, we've always found the airplane. To have one that we can't find is one of aviation, probably aviation's greatest single mystery. And aviation does not do well with mysteries. And that's why so much effort has been put into it.
And is it an effort that you think should keep going?
Absolutely. If we're not looking, we can't find it. To just give up at this point, I'm not prepared to do that.
The search for MH370 is unparalleled in aviation history. Using the keenest minds and the most advanced science, the Australian-led investigation has exhausted the most probable scenarios. At this stage, sadly, the result does not mirror the effort. But with no plane, the unlikely has become the likely for investigators, that MH370 may have been flown beyond any feasible search parameters. It's the nightmare scenario, leaving a whole lot of ocean still to be searched, if we have the will to do it.
I'm not sure, given the likely cost of extending the search for this aircraft, how much hope it is reasonable to hold out. And I think the other thing is the data we have already means that we can form a view, broadly speaking, about what happened, reduce the likelihood of a recurrence. That can be done now.
Without finding the plane, is what
Without
you're
finding
saying.
the plane.
So are you saying, in your opinion, it's not necessary to find the plane? It's not necessary to keep searching?
It's highly desirable. It's not necessary to the basics of investigating and understanding what happened here. So that's from the point of view of understanding this event. All I'm saying is the basic conclusions about what happened here are already available on the evidence that is sitting there.
But do we all agree? I mean, what is the conclusion? What actually happened to the plane?
So this was planned, this was deliberate, and it was done over an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm. I think that the general public, the traveling public, can take comfort in the fact that there is a consensus, growing consensus, that this was a criminal act, and therefore it was not a problem with the airplane. And the fact that it was a criminal act actually simplifies it down to what can you do to prevent somebody who already has control of an airplane from doing whatever they want to do with that airplane. Can you do that?
Just this year, Amanda Lawton and her partner Dave welcomed a new generation to their family. Bobby, named in memory of his grandfather, is now 3 months old. Sadly, he will never get to meet his grandparents, Bob and Kathy. Do you tell Bobby about his grandparents, about your mum and dad?
I'm a little bit too young just yet, but I do wonder, when the questions will come up. How do you explain that to a little kid and without any answers ourselves? They've had an accident, but it's not like you can say they disappeared. But that's pretty much the story, isn't it?
I'm sure Amanda Lawton speaks for every family who has lost loved ones on MH370. Our thoughts are with them all.